Long time no see, everyone. I have a Facebook group where I give feedback to artists who want to improve the shading in their paintings. If you're interested, you can also apply for joining. The link is in the description. So this painting was sent in by the member Anna. The shapes are pretty accurate, but there are some typical problems in the shading. I'm going to point out those problems and do a paint over. The main problem of this painting is the missing of the primary forms. The main light source comes from here, and it should create a shadow like this on the cylindrical form of the body, which is the primary form of the body. The primary form of the arm is also a cylinder. The same light source will also create a shadow in a similar form. The head, however, observe, is not lit by the same light source. It is actually entirely in the shadow of the head, but it's lit by an extra light source coming from front. And this light source will also create a form shadow like this. These form shadows are created by the primary forms of the geometry. They are indeed present on the photo reference, but they are very difficult to recognize. In fact, it's the main issue of this painting that these primary shadows are missing. Let me add these shadows back into the painting and see how much improvement it will bring. So I add a new layer and set the layer blending mode to multiply. Because I'm painting the missing shadows, I also use clipping mask so that I don't paint out of the region of the bottom layer. I use a dark brown to paint the shadow because black would have resulted in a much too desaturated color in the shadow region. Let me use a big airbrush to paint the shadow because this shadow has a very soft boundary. By the way, if you use Procreate, you can download my brushes. The link is in the description. So now I'm painting exactly these big shadows. Let me speed it up a little bit. This part of the arm is also turning away from this light source. So let me select this area and add some shadows to it too. I noticed that his right upper arm is a little bit too short, so let me correct it. Let me group the original painting and my shadow layer together and name it Character. So now I can use the liquify tool to change these two layers at the same time. Also, the shoulder could be a little bit wider. Now let's look at the shadow layer that I painted all by itself. I add a layer below my shadow layer and fill it with a solid color. You see here what I've done so far. And compare the painting with and without the shadows. You see that the shadows have restored the missing three-dimensionality of the subject. So far, I have fixed the big primary shadows. Now let me do some refinements of the smaller shadows. Let me change to a hard round brush and paint some smaller shadows that are missing. I usually paint the shadows with a hard round brush set to low opacity. I paint them with hard edges first and use the smudge tool to soften the boundaries where it's needed. Always be very careful with the white parts of the eye. If it's in the shadow, the white parts of the eye are never white. Actually, if you look at the photo reference, you don't see the white parts of the eye. The entire region of the eyeball, including the upper and the bottom eyelids, is shaped like a sphere, so it should shade it in that way too. The light source on the face creates this kind of shadows on them. And these are the planes on the face that are turning away from the light source. Remember, the light source on the face comes from in front of the image. The color of the beard itself without shadow, or as artists call it, the local color of the beard, is darker than the local color of the skin. So I also paint the beard darker here. Now I do some refinements on the face, the cheekbone, the ear, and so on. These are the cast shadows created by the color. Let's look at the shadows that I've painted so far and compare that with the original painting. The original painting also lacks some defined shapes of the small shadows. Let me add some hard edges to the shadows. This side of the face is a little bit too light. Let me darken it. The first major problem that I pointed out at the beginning was that there are missing shadows of the primary forms. Now the second major problem is that there are missing lights of the primary forms. The regional dark parts inside the light zones of the primary forms are painted too dark on this painting. This is just the opposite side of the first problem. These two problems always come together, and they result in the overall lack of three-dimensionality. Let me add another layer to light up those parts in the light zone which were painted too dark. I'll just use a normal layer here and pick the light colors from the original painting to paint over those places that I want to correct. Now compare these two versions before and after I've added light to the light zone. Another related problem regarding the values is that our eyes always exaggerate the differences between neighboring values. For example, these light and dark parts on the wrist, these are the colors if you pick them from the photo reference. But the artist painted a bigger difference in their values. Let me paint over this part with smaller differences of values. And here again are the missing lights in the light zone. Now let's look at these light spots on the nose. What are they? Probably you'll call them highlights, but I call them specular reflections. In fact, the specular reflection is a very interesting but also very confusing part of the lighting. The highlight and the specular reflection are related, but they are not the same. Understanding specular reflection is the key for painting a high degree of realism. I offer online tutoring where I go into depth on this and many other topics for rendering. If you are interested, check out the link in my description. So there are many specular reflections on his face. There is also a big one here. The dark local color of the beard obscures the real shape of the specular reflection, but it's actually one single specular reflection. And there are also many smaller ones on the ear, because the ear has a complex shape. Some of them were already painted on the original. Also, while I was painting the shadows, I have also accidentally painted some specular reflections by not painting them dark. Here, let me just add some missing ones. Let me stop here with my overpainting. Let's compare before and after. This is by no means a finished painting for me, but I hope I have dealt with the most important issues. See you next time.